Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the beginning of westward expansion within the United States. And so, the first lesson actually is going to look at it from a different perspective than you probably ordinarily looked at westward expansion from. So, we traditionally look at westward expansion from Americans' perspective and moving westward and extending our settlements, the whole idea of manifest destiny. And we'll take a look at that in class a little bit, but today we're going to kind of take a look at it from the Native Americans' perspective or the American Indians and kind of see like how this is affecting them and what different Native American tribes we're coming in contact with as American settlement extends westward. So we're going to start actually with American Indians and their status within the country and how they're viewed within the United States. So we talked about this a little bit earlier in our class. If you trace kind of Native American history within the United States, once the United States is established, they have a very unique position. So the term that I gave you guys was they're called a domestic dependent nation, which means that they're within the boundaries of the United States, but technically, in many ways, the United States treated them as foreign countries. And so the reason we have Andrew Jackson here is because he plays a central role in this whole idea. But they signed treaties with the Native Americans, with individual tribes. They often broke their treaties with the Native Americans, but in certain sense, they're a foreign nation. And so, like, Native Americans have their own separate territory with their own separate laws and rules. But in a lot of ways, they're also within the boundaries of the United States. So it's kind of a unique American situation. And so when you look at Native Americans, going back to early time periods in beginning of the American nation, they're not American citizens, uh, both because Americans don't want them to be a part of the new Republic of the United States, and also because they don't want to be a part of uh, American society either. They want to retain their own independence, their own uh, way of life, and their own rules and laws. So it's kind of an interesting status that Native Americans have within the country. And at this point, they're still not citizens of the nation. So the last time we talked about Native Americans and we talked about what was going on with them was really during Andrew Jackson's presidency and the Indian Removal Act. So this plays a huge role. If you look here, you still have in the 1820s and 1830s a few tribes who are hanging on east of the Mississippi. So you have the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws. Up in the north, you have the Foxes, a couple of different tribes that are kind of hanging on in the eastern part of the United States. And so when Andrew Jackson famously enforces this Indian Removal Act and kind of tries to convince Native Americans to move west of the Mississippi to these new territories designated for them, uh, he really effectively, by ignoring John Marshall's decision in uh, the famous Supreme Court case of Worcester versus Georgia, really basically moves all Native Americans east of the Mississippi, west of the Mississippi. And so this really changes the game and starts to expand American expansion within the southern United States and the northern United States. Now, when you look at where they're going to end up, they're going to end up in what's present day mostly Oklahoma, a little bit of southern Kansas, maybe like a little bit of northern Texas. Um, and basically they end up on what's known as Indian reservations. Okay, so these are supposed to be designated Indian territory. And if you notice here, each tribe kind of got their own specific area within the Indian reservation. And so they kind of set these different tribes up here, and they were supposed to kind of be left there and kind of left for their own to run their nations by their own rules and by their own laws, just like they did in the East. So it's kind of just like transplanting them from the Eastern United States to the Western United States. Now, what you should kind of be aware of, and a lot of you guys know American history pretty well, is that Americans are going to keep trying to extend westward. So this whole idea of keeping this permanent Indian country here, that's going to last for a small amount of time, but it's going to also change because Americans are going to want to move westward. And so, like they create a whole federal branch of or federal organization to control the Indian reservation. So it's known as the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so basically, the United States, even though they get their separate nations, it's not that they're outside of American influence and American control. So this organization, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, they were out there to kind of like oversee everything that was happening within these reservations to make sure that everything was running well, and that they were established in their new society and their new community. And this is going to be an important organization because they're going to come back later on. At this point, some terms you want to kind of be aware of: uh, the idea of assimilation, or kind of segregation of the Indians. At this point, the idea is kind of to give Indians their own home, and to leave them in these reservations and to not try and assimilate them into American society. In the late 1800s, the ideology is going to change, and they're going to try and assimilate Native Americans into mainstream American society. And so the Bureau of Indian Affairs is going to play a major role in that whole process of assimilation, or trying to assimilate Native Americans. Now, one big thing you should be thinking in your mind is that, well, as they move westward, there's already Native American tribes that live west of the Mississippi. And so your textbook, you read about a lot of different tribes, and they have different lifestyles. So one of the things you want to keep in mind about the Native Americans, depending on their geographic region in which they develop, they have different lifestyles and different ways of life. So if you look at, say, like uh, what's known as the Eastern Woodlands Indians, which are like continental United States at the time, so everything east of the Mississippi, they really have a lifestyle that's mixed. Uh, they hunt and gather. They hunt in the forest, and they gather, different wild fruits and wild nuts from the forest. But they also have limited agriculture. So they practice in kind of like these seasonal areas, and they grow crops, and they kind of have a mixed economy. Most of them. When you go to the west, again, different regions have different lifestyles. So you want to be aware of the Southwest Indians. Then you have the Great Plains Indians, and then you have like the West Coast, these different Indians that live out here. We're going to focus on the Great Plains Indians for a couple of reasons. One, they have a different lifestyle for the most part than the Eastern Woodlands Indians. Two, they put up the most resistance to American expansion, and I think that they're some of the most interesting tribes to learn about, and they have some of the most unique culture. So the tribes that we're going to focus mostly on, I mean, there's some famous ones up here like the Crow and the Sioux. Down here you have some famous ones too, the Apaches, the Comanches. We're going to focus mostly on the Sioux because the Sioux are the most effective at resisting American expansion, and they last the longest as an independent, functioning tribe within the western United States. And so, just to kind of show you guys, we're going to look at this in much more detail on Monday, but this is the expansion of America westward. We're gaining the Louisiana Territory here in the middle here. And Americans, what we're going to look at on Monday is why Americans are moving westward. The big ideological reasons for why we're moving westward, um, what's behind manifest destiny and this whole idea, and then kind of on the individual reasons why are Americans wanting to move westward. So like some of the things I asked you guys to focus on were push and pull factors as to why they're moving westward. So we're going to take a look at that in some detail on Monday in class. Now, when you look at kind of the lifestyle of the Plains Indians, uh, one of the things that you want to understand is there's two animals that play a huge, I guess you could say three animals that play a big role in kind of their lifestyle. Two really significant ones, and then one a more minor one that plays a decent role in their life. The first one is native to the area, and has been there for generations. And actually, at this time in history, there's some of the largest herds of animals in the entire world. So the first animal that plays a huge role in the Plains Indians' life is going to be the buffalo. And so buffaloes are just tremendous animals, huge herding animals, and they travel in these massive packs. And so a lot of the Plains Indians, including the Sioux, their lifestyle kind of revolves around the buffalo, and for two reasons. Um, Originally, I mean, buffalo, they can provide so many things for the society, so many things for the culture, as far as meat, but then also clothing, and they use all different parts of the buffalo. So it's a huge part of their society, and it's a huge part of their culture. Secondly, once they start to come in contact with white settlers, and the Sioux are very good at this, they're going to start to again bargain with these settlers and bargain with these white settlers for trading and using the buffalo to trade and kind of using it as a marketing tool with these new settlers. The tribe that I think you should compare the Sioux to the most is going to be the Iroquois. Okay, so as we go through this, I want you guys to think of the Iroquois and how the Iroquois dealt with colonial Americans and how they used trade as a tool to survive. I think that's very important because the Sioux do the same thing, and the Sioux also are a dominant Native American tribe amongst the other Native American tribes. And so they move into people's territory, take their territory, extend their hunting grounds, which means that they can trade more with the white Americans. And so I think that is a very similar group of people. Now, the paintings that you guys are looking at here, these are paintings by a famous American named George Catlin, and he kind of is among some of the earlier settlers that moved westward, and he kind of is one of the last people, one of the last groups of people to see Native Americans living in their true cultural, with their true culture, untouched by American expansion. And so he kind of sees like Native Americans for who they are, and so like this, I think is when people think of Native Americans, American Indians, they think of the Plains Indians. So they live in the teepees out on the Great Plains, hunting the buffalo, surviving off the buffalo. These are your Great Plains Indians. Now, the other animal that is instrumental to their survival and to their lifestyle that they develop is going to be the horse. Okay, so the horse is actually not native to North America at all. It's introduced by the Spanish when the Spanish come and colonize South America. Uh, Horses get introduced into American Indian lifestyle. So the Sioux and some other Great Plains Indians adapt and adopt the horse, and it becomes a huge part of their life. And so they're going to kind of live on horseback and do all of their hunting on horseback. So the internationally, the group that the Sioux remind me of, as far as their warrior-like qualities and their use of the horse, is going to be the Mongols. They live a similar lifestyle to the Mongols as far as um, semi-nomadic, moving from place to place, uh, hunting, relying heavily on hunting. The difference, I would say, is that the Mongols are what you call pastoral nomads, which means that they raise different animals. They used to raise yaks and different animals out on the Great Asian Steppes in Mongolia. The Sioux are much more hunting driven. They don't need to raise the animals because the buffalo are there and they're so prevalent. There's millions upon millions of buffalo, and I think that's an important thing to note because by the late 1800s, it's going to be dwindled down to almost extinct. And we're going to talk about that later, how that developed. But I think that's a fair comparison to make between the Mongols and the Sioux and their warrior-like qualities and how they use their animals to survive on these huge, vast open plains. So geography plays a role, and that's kind of how they fit into this lifestyle. And so, you know, hunting buffalo and kind of using the buffalo is a huge part of their life. But think, they're similar to other Native American tribes. They don't believe that animals are just there for them to do with as they please. They feel like they're a part of the natural society, and they have to respect their animals, and they have to respect them as almost like having a spirit similar to them. So that's a similarity between them and the other Native Americans we talked about previously. Now, trading was going on between, there's some early Americans moving westward. We're going to call these people the mountain men, and some early frontier people moving westward. This is before the big expansion westward of Americans. And so they would meet in these kind of like makeshift, I don't want to call them towns, but like makeshift fairs between. This is really interesting culturally. You have Native Americans going there, Spanish, American mountain men, and they would all kind of bring their different furs and skins and things, and different things that each group wanted, and they would kind of trade. It's very similar to kind of a medieval fair. They would prop up for like a couple of days and then go back to nothing, and there would be nothing there afterwards. So it's kind of a unique development of the frontier, and it shows a kind of a cultural mixing on the frontier. All right, we're going to be out of time here, so we're going to pick up with this stuff on Monday.